Good evening, everyone. And today I'm going to be talking about exploring some of the perceived barriers and tailored interventions in youth soccer and injury prevention. This is going to be a comprehensive examination on social, psychological, and environmental factors that may lead to increased chances of injury, especially among youth athletics in the female standing. So a few things that we'll talk about today are some of the perceived barriers that I have noticed and that current literature has noticed, as well as some unique challenges faced by female athletes, the importance of these perceived barriers, some gaps in research that we have, insights from stakeholders, the role of the social support and the physiological factors that are needed as well. We're going to be going all over all of these, as well as intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for why injury prevention techniques should be looked at more closely. Some of the mechanisms of some of the injuries that occur, and we'll also talk a little bit about the research being done and about the research that I did along the way with coaches, athletes, and parents of children participating in youth athletics. So some current perceived barriers to injury prevention in soccer: lack of tailored injury prevention strategies. Youth female soccer players are often overlooked in injury prevention programs. This leads to more specific injury risks such as ACL tears, ankle sprains, and concussions that are more prevalent in the female athletes that participate in soccer, according to Hewitt et al. And Meyer et al. Both of them, Hewitt in 2016 and Meyer in 2014, discussed how these injuries are happening at an increasing rate in youth athletics, specifically on the female side. And although there is a positive trend growing in female participation of youth soccer, the injuries are also growing as well. Insufficient research is a big factor as well. Social and environmental factors impacting injury prevention are not well studied. This lack of knowledge and lack of training is discussed by Benson et al. In his 2015 paper, as well as Garrison et al. In 2018, where they credited a lot of injuries mainly just due to lack of knowledge and lack of resources. Although the trend is in the increasing favor for female participation in sports, there still is gender disparity in a lot of studies. Most injury prevention studies that I found focus on the male athletes versus the female athletes, which leads us into our next barrier, which is limited understanding. Because of this research being more tailored towards the male gender, it is hard to find research or knowledge pertaining to female athletes in the sport. And there's more of a need for targeted interventions at this level. It's a very unique sport with unique risks, lateral motion, contact, extra stress, especially on the knees and the ankles and the lower body joints. It's not like most sports. Because of this, it needs to be targeted in a specific way. Some other unique challenges that are faced by female athletes are higher risks of ACL injuries. So, in the Manly, back in 2019, looked into ACL tears and found that there was a higher prevalence in female athletes, specifically soccer athletes, having a higher susceptibility to ACL tears than their male counterparts due to increasing risk of long-term impact and performance on well-being. This is for a variety of reasons. This is that the ligaments in the female body tend to be more pliable. However, we are not discussing that during this time. They also have an increased vulnerability to ankle sprains. Hinton and Manley in 2019 also discussed that as well, that due to having higher mobility, they are most likely to get a recurrent injury in their ankles. Concussion concerns. Currently, according to the WHO, And according to ESPN, there is a higher risk of female athletes in soccer getting concussions, and is actually the number one sport for females to get concussions in at the moment. Uh, they're unsure of the reasons. It could be higher chances of contact. Usually, these concussions occur when both athletes are going for a chance ball in the air and they both go for the header and they just collide. Another challenge is the lack of tailored injury prevention programs. So again, their male counterparts seem to get most of the tailored programs, while the female counterparts have not really been seen. So the importance in understanding some of these barriers is crucial for developing effective injury prevention strategies. We need to know how female athletes react to different stimuluses and how we can prevent injuries. Types of perceived barriers. There's a lot of perceived barriers, both sociological, physiological, and psychological, on female athletes and participating in youth sports. A lot of it leads to lack of knowledge of injury risks. That is currently a major gap in the literature that we are looking at. Again, it mainly focuses on their male counterparts. Even despite the increasing participation in females in youth soccer, there's limited exploration on female-specific issues. Barr and Crossog in 2005 and Lau et al. In 2017 found again that mainly it was their male counterparts that were investigated during this time, and there wasn't much female investigation occurring for youth sports. Another factor to consider is more psychological and sociological. Coaching practices, parental attitudes, access to resources have not really been thoroughly examined in the context of female youth soccer. Harrison et al. In 2018 and Wilkins et al. In 2020 found that these barriers are crucial for the development of effective injury prevention, because you need that parental and coaching supervision in order to effectively get these athletes ready to prevent injuries. And another gap that we currently have is that there is a lack of longitudinal studies that track the importance of injury prevention and interventions on female youth players over time. Most studies are cross-sectional, and they only provide a snapshot of the issue rather than a comprehensive understanding of how perceived barriers evolve and affect injury rates of this population. Hewitt et al. And Meyer et al. Found that there wasn't really any specific scholarly articles that discuss this at a longitudinal standpoint. And lastly, there is a need for more qualitative research that captures the voices and experiences of female soccer players, coaches, and parents. There's plenty of quantitative data that can highlight the trends, correlations, and qualitative data that can provide deeper insights just fighting a bit of a cold, into the lived experiences and perceptions of those directly involved in the sport. Hinton and Manley found that there wasn't really much qualitative data at all. It was more quantitative. And thinking of action research, what we've learned this whole semester, we need to really find that qualitative research and find what this population needs the most directly from their mouths versus just quantitative data of how injury prevention can occur. We need to go to the local level. We need to discuss with these athletes how they think these barriers are holding them back. Addressing these barriers will enhance the safety and well-being of these youth soccer players, as well as allow coaches, players themselves, and potentially parents to have a better look at tailored intervention programs for their children. Again, getting back into the gaps in research in injury prevention, there's existing literature bias is predominantly about male athletes. It's underrepresented needs. A lot of coaches may underreport injury due to the fear, the stigma, or the pressure of being able to perform. Hinton and Manley in 2019 found that to be true. Despite there being a push for equal participation, there still is gender disparity within the sport. Lack of education, just due to lack of resources, is major key on why there's a huge gap in research. Not many coaches are educated on injury prevention. There is a push nowadays excuse me, to try and fill this gap, but it is a slow and ongoing process. And there is a research gap. There is a lack of research for the needs faced by adolescent soccer players at the moment. Now, a lot of the key stakeholders in this research that I conducted were female soccer players. I spoke to the players specifically, and they tended to express their frustration due to limited access to injury prevention training programs. Most of the players that I spoke with ended up finding that they just had no real education on injury prevention techniques. So prior to the program that was implemented, they found that only 35% of them knew about common injuries that occur in soccer. Only 40% of them said that they were confident with their warm-up and cool-down techniques preventing injuries, and only 45% of them said that they received adequate hydration and nutrition during their training. Again, this is due to education, because once we spoke and we implemented a few different processes for recovery, post-program, those numbers jumped up incredibly. 85% of them said that they knew what common injuries were. 90% of them knew what proper warm-up and cool-down, and 88% of them were confident in their hydration and nutrition. Coaches are the next stakeholder. Coaches were cited time constraints for practice, not having enough time to really educate the kids, and lack of training as barriers to implementing injury prevention protocols effectively. Again, there's only so many hours of the day. It depends on what level of sport that you're participating in. If you're participating in a varsity level sport through high school, you're going to at least get those kids 5 to 6 times a week for at least an hour, hour and a half at a time. It seems like a lot of time, but it really isn't. If you're participating at a club level, usually clubs, especially during the main season, which is right now, only receive these kids from 1 to 2 times per week. So again, time constraints are really big. With this going forward, we did assess coaches and their attitude evaluations towards the sport and what could be done better. So coaches were cited pre-program as saying that physical conditioning was 55% importance to preventing injuries, social support was 60% towards preventing injuries, and mental preparation was also 60% towards preventing injuries in the future. After a bit of discussion, our interviews, and just a bit more research, post-program, the coaches found that they would say the physical conditioning is about 95% of the leading cause in preventing injuries. Social support, 93%. If they have a great home life, if they have people in their life that are going to support them towards their wishes, towards bringing them to practice every day, towards helping them make healthier decisions in their lifestyle, that's going to go up to 93%. It's very important. And then lastly, coaches jumped up from 60% to 93% on mental preparation. They said that having a good mentality, being strong, being focused, having a good head on your shoulders, that will help you significantly prevent injuries, especially having a positive outlook on the sport. And then parents also agreed upon this as well. Pre-program, parents said that physical conditioning was 60% of contributing factor towards injury prevention. Social support was 70%, so they actually had it a bit higher than the coaches. And that mental preparation was 60%, so about the same as the coaches. Physical conditioning jumped up to 97% in parental eyes. Social support jumped up to 94%, and mental preparation jumped up to 95% post-discussion. So parents are starting to see that it's not just a one-takes-all approach. It's not just the nutrition. It's not just the training. It's the mental and physiological aspects of it as well. This leads me to the most important thing that we found in this study. That would be a collective approach. So we can't just have only the athletes worried about their injury prevention, the coaches only worried about injury prevention, or the parents only worried about injury prevention. We need it to be a three-legged stool with each one of these groups supporting the other in order to create a collective injury prevention technique. Again, gaps in research and scholarship that were addressed by parents, coaches, and athletes. What they found that they were most frustrated in was that there was a limited focus on injuries. There still is gender disparity. Some of them did go home after we spoke and look up scholarly articles and found again that most of them are focusing on the male athletes, not the female athletes, which leads to insufficient exploration of this topic, lack of tailored interventions, and underrepresentation. Again, these young girls are looking for articles on how to prevent injuries in female athletes, and they cannot find very many. It's mostly tailored towards their male counterparts. Social and environmental factors in injury prevention. So, social and environmental factors play a crucial role in injury prevention among youth soccer players. Again, that number increasing by leaps and bounds when we interviewed coaches and players as well as parents, found that they really need to get into the social environment in order to participate and stay healthy in sports. The literature currently tends to focus more on the physiological and biomechanical factors of these young female athletes. However, the role of the social support systems is just as important as the physiological, and the psychological factors are also just as important in this as well. So, a pivotal study by Harrison et al. Back in 2018 utilized qualitative interviews with female athletes to explore their experiences and perceptions of injury risk prevention, and they found that many athletes felt ill-equipped to manage their injury risks due to lack of knowledge and resources. Many of these participants express extreme frustrations with the limited availability of training programs focused on injury prevention, which again leads to the contribution of a vulnerability in injury prevention. Complementing Harrison et al., Wilkins and Ritchie back in 2020 conducted a qualitative analysis that focused on the barriers perceived by coaches and parents regarding injury prevention in female youth sports. Their research uncovered a significant disconnect between the intentions of coaches to implement injury prevention, the actual practices observed during training sessions. So some coaches might say, we're going to have a proper warm-up and cool-down technique in order to prevent injuries. And then they go out, they do practice, and maybe it's due to time constraints, maybe it's due to other reasons, they don't follow through on what they said they were going to do for injury prevention. And insufficient support from organizations ended up citing this as well. Coaches, again, they cited time constraints, lack of training, insufficient support, all as barriers towards actually implementing effective injury prevention programs. While parents expressed concerns about the prioritization of competitive performance over athletic safety. So these parents are watching their kids get pushed to the limits in maybe not the safest ways, and they're worried that the coaches are more concerned about the athletic performance, about winning, rather than actually keeping these children safe, which is a valid concern, especially when society nowadays, typically coaches, in order to keep their jobs, have to have a winning record. So it can be seen as a valid barrier. Strength in these studies really lies in the methodologies, the qualitative methodologies versus the quantitative methodologies. Moreover, existing literature primarily focuses on individual perceptions rather than examining the broader systemic issues. Socioeconomic factors such as cultural attitudes towards females participating in sports are overlooked. Lau et al. In 2017 did discuss this and did say that current research provides a solid foundation for understanding perceived barriers, but there is a pressing need for studies to explore these issues with a broader societal context. There is a need for research to examine the intersectionality of these barriers faced by female athletes as well, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, understanding how factors such as race, social and economic status, geographic location, and how they influence perceptions on injury prevention can provide more tailored and equipped programs. And we also need to explore the role of technology in injury prevention as well. There's so many technological advances nowadays. Many clubs and soccer teams do not have access to this. If there were more grants available, if we had more money available in order to get this advanced technology, if there was athletic trainers that were allowed to be paid on staff, would these rates go down? It's a major question to think about as well. Next thing we have to think about is the actual effectiveness of the tailored programs. A cornerstone study in this is from Meyer et al. In reducing injury risks to ACL injuries. She investigated it back in 2014 and said that ACL injuries are more common in young female soccer players. And if you incorporate an injury program, there is a specific and significant reduction in injury rates compared to teams that did not implement a program. Another systemic study and review by Sadagi et al. In 2016 examined multiple studies on injury prevention across various sports, soccer included, and it concluded that well-structured programs, particularly those focusing on neuromuscular training, are most effective in reducing the incidence of injuries in young female athletes. But it needs to be regular and consistent implementation that was mainly linked to diminished rates. A study by Karp et al. As well explored the challenges faced by youth soccer organizations in adapting and maintaining injury prevention initiatives. Their findings really indicated that many coaches cited a lack of time and resources as their primary obstacles to implementing these programs and training regimens. The strengths of all of these studies that were discussed are examining the effectiveness of injury prevention programs with robust methodologies and randomized controlled trials in systemic reviews as well. So, if we can, another factor that we can look at is the integration of technology into injury prevention. It's an unexplored area in literature. We unfortunately did not have the time to explore it in this study. However, in future studies, I do believe that it should be explored at a larger length. One of the last things I would like to discuss about factors in injury prevention is the social factor of social support and injury prevention. So one of the seminal studies in this area of research was conducted by McKay et al. In 2018, and it investigated the influence of parental support on injury prevention behaviors in young female athletes. The study utilized mixed methods approach. It combined surveys and interviews to explore how parental attitudes and behaviors impacted their daughters' adherence to injury prevention protocol. Now, findings indicated that athletes who perceived high levels of parental support were way more likely to engage in preventive measures such as warm-up routines and strength training exercises, whereas parents who actively participated in their child's sports activities and expressed positive feedback about injury prevention fostered an environment that was conducive to safe practices as well. Additionally, the work of Thompson et al. Examined the role of coaches in shaping injury prevention in these youth soccer players. Coaches who actively communicated the importance of injury prevention provided positive reinforcement and were shown to significantly influence their athletes' preventative measures towards injury. Give me 1 moment. So this, looking at the literature, looking at the research, leads to the problem statement and the research question. The problem statement being that female youth players face injury risks at a higher and unique rate than such as ACL tears, ankle sprains, that necessitate tailored programs and interventive strategies. So what are some of the perceived barriers hindering effective injury prevention techniques and programs in youth players, and how can tailored intervention programs help with these challenges? Again, some of the ones that we've highlighted are lack of technology, lack of social support, lack of implementation of the training program itself, lack of research available, lack of gender-specific research being available are some of the major key ones that we found. This leads us into discussing developing tailored interventions for female athletes. So tailored interventions, we need to address the specific injury prevention based on gender-specific needs and risk factors, strength and conditioning programs. We need to target biomechanical differences that contribute to injury risk. Educational workshops can be had by coaches, athletes, parents to help educate about injury prevention techniques. Neuromuscular training programs, having a certified trainer on staff, getting more educated in which muscles need to be targeted to prevent these injuries is a very big factor in injury prevention in youth sports. Limited training programs were cited again as being a barrier, such as time constraints by the coaches, lack of organizational support, insufficient resources, and a disconnect in practices. So saying one thing and implementing the other. Effectiveness of injury programs. So there has been a 50% reduction in injury rates with those who end up implementing the 11 plus program similar to FIFA. Give me one moment. That was by where et al. Discussed the 11 plus program. Effects of neuromuscular training. A well-structured program in neuromuscular training has shown effective in reducing injury incidents. Something crucial to consider is also consistent implementation. We can't just implement an injury program for one day a week and expect it to work. It has to be every single day that these kids are out on the field. Managing engagement is another challenge that's faced by this as well. Some of the roles of social support and injury prevention are the role of parental support. It leads to adherence and strategies, a culture of safety. Key roles, coaches, parents, they have to provide that safe space for kids to feel like they can discuss injuries when they occur, where kids can ask how they can effectively and essentially prevent injuries in the future, and a supportive environment that fosters collaboration between the athlete and the coaches. Psychological factors that we found in injury prevention were just making sure that the kids feel safe, promoting adherence and recovery, enhancing the prevention programs. Really intrinsic and extrinsic motivation were key factors. You want to be a better player, you want to score more goals, injury prevention will be the biggest thing. Again, intrinsic motivation and injury prevention plays a vital role in athletes' commitment to the program. Athletes with high intrinsic motivation are more likely to engage consistently in warm-up routines, strength training exercises. Cultivating intrinsic motivation can lead to sustained adherence and injury prevention, contributing to long-term athlete well-being. Coaches and parents also play a pivotal role in fostering intrinsic motivation in these kids. A bit more on the methodology of how we took place of this study. So we looked and investigated a diverse group of female youth soccer players, anywhere from the ages of 12 to 17. Coaches and parents of these players were recruited from local clubs and high schools. And we ended up giving two separate surveys. The first was more just of an informal survey, just discussing what their knowledge was walking in on injury prevention, as well as any prior knowledge that they may have. These were handed out at practice to all of the local clubs, to all the players, all the coaches, and some of the parents that wanted to participate as well. The second we did was informal interviews with these same people, just asking a few questions, asking what they knew about injury prevention, what they knew about hydration, nutrition, what they knew about the mental and physical aspects involved in taking part in youth soccer. Going forward, how can we address everything that we've learned? Again, we found a significant increase after discussion of injury prevention techniques in shifting of attitudes from the parents. By leaps and bounds, parents found more support for their athletes. Pre-survey and interview, again, many of the athletes only had a 35% knowledge of common injuries, 40% knowledge of warm-up and cool-down techniques, and 45% knowledge of hydration and nutrition. After we discussed and implemented a bit of an educational workshop on injury prevention, once we got these studies back, they shot up incredibly. So athletes found that they knew 85% common injuries, they knew 90% of warm-up and cool-down techniques, and were more confident in performing their warm-up and cool-downs on their own. And they found that hydration and nutrition played a more significant role in injury prevention than they previously thought. Parents and coaches found that physical conditioning was a bigger part of preventing injuries than they thought. Many of them, parents being 50%, coaches being 55% pre-program, jumped to 90 and 95% post-program. They found that social support was a bigger factor than they originally thought. They had both said it was 60% of injury prevention. That jumped to 93 to 98. Mental preparation was another one that coaches and parents significantly underlooked. They found that they only believe a 60% of mental preparation was necessary to prevent injuries, but post workshops and post discussions towards the end of the study found that it was 93 to 95% a key factor in preventing injuries. Plans going forward, we should do workshop series, conducting a series of workshops focusing on effective injury prevention. You can go specifically to club to club, discuss different preventive measures for the kids, for the coaches. And again, I know that it is listed as a time constraint, but this workshop can literally just be a 1 hour workshop where you discuss all of these factors with the kids and parents and coaches as well. You cover the key topics, you cover the sociological, physiological aspects, you possibly discuss a little bit of potential technology that can aid in recovery as well. You make it interactive. You implement these sessions, you ask questions, you go right into the warm-up, you show them the proper warm-up. You don't just give them a PowerPoint presentation of these are the proper exercises. You actually go through the proper exercises for warm-up and cool-down. You go through the appropriate sequences, and you find that kids are going to retain way more that way. Practical demonstrations, again, same as the interactive. You're going to show hands-on exactly what you can do, how to properly roll out, how to properly massage areas that might be cramping, how to properly stretch, how to properly hold a stretch, how to do partner stretches. You show that hands-on for those kids, and they will retain that information. Participant engagement. You just really create a fun environment. You create a lot of energy, give and take scenario where you allow the kids, the coaches, and the parents to feel safe to ask and engage in questions and activities. Data analysis and study design, pre-test, post-test. We utilize pre-test, post-tests to compare survey responses before and after the interventions. We did quantitative analysis. We used descriptive statistics paired with t-tests to measure knowledge and attitudes. Qualitative analysis, we really just looked at thematic framework to identify key themes and patterns. Comprehensive understanding, we did a mixed methods approach to gain more of a holistic view on any injury prevention barriers. And ethical considerations, we were ensuring informed consent, confidentiality, and adherence to ethical guidelines throughout the research process, especially because these children are minors. The impact of the injury prevention program, I know I've listed it a few times in this presentation, but here are the numbers specifically. Knowledge increased for injury prevention programs. 85% of participants understood common injuries, which was up from 35% in the beginning of the study. That's incredible. If athletes know exactly what they're looking for, they're going to perform at a much higher rate. 95% attitude shift. So a lot of the participants found that physical conditioning wasn't very important. Only 55% of them ranked it as very important. By the end of our discussion, it went up to 95%. Behavioral improvement. Warming up consistently. Some people found that I want to say about 30% of people found that warming up consistently prevents injuries. After our discussion, that went up to 80%. And overall program impact, gains in knowledge, attitude changes, and behavioral impacts were statistically significant since the p-value was less than 0.01. What can we do going forward? We need positive shifts in attitudes and behaviors. We need an increased importance of physical conditioning, emphasis on social support, and behavioral changes. So we need, again, that three-legged stool support from everyone. We need the support from the athletes to each other, the support of the coaches to the athletes, the support of the parents to the athletes. We need all these positive shifts from a sociological and psychological perspective to come together in order to create a better attitude in injury prevention. Parents play a crucial role in this. Again, if they have support at home, they're engaging in open communication between parents and coaches. Players can foster a culture of safety where they feel safe to ask questions about injuries, where they feel safe to report injuries, where they can go and find different injury prevention techniques alongside their parents. The parents being better educated in the sport leads to better participation in the sport as well. Some mechanisms of ACL injuries going forward that should be investigated at a larger rate for female athletes are biomechanical factors. Non-contact injuries, a lot of them occur just from landing from a jump or changes in direction. They're not really contact injuries. Gender disparity, again, a lot of the ACL tears have been investigated more on the male side, even though female athletes have been shown to have higher risk of ACL tears compared to males. Neuromuscular control, how can we increase these workouts and neuromuscular facilitation so that the landing mechanics can decrease the chances of ACL risk, and how can we implement, again, injury prevention programs at a much wider rate to prevent these injuries. And then again, just reiteration of training programs being limited, time constraints, lacks of resources, insufficient organizational support were found to be themes throughout the study from beginning to end. Another piece that should be investigated as well, especially post-program implementation, is the role of physiotherapy in injury management. It's crucial in managing injuries among youth soccer players because it focuses on the rehabilitation of injury prevention, as well as what a lot of trainers call prehabilitation, preventing injuries before they even occur, and promotes a better overall physiological well-being. Techniques that can be used are manual therapy, exercise programs, modalities such as ultrasound and electronic stim. You can also use massage guns, rollers. The limits in technology are endless, and again, that technology does need to be investigated at a higher rate. The goals here are to optimize recovery, restore function, and prevent future injuries in these athletes. Excuse me. Again, neuromuscular training for injury prevention. We really need to focus on improving the strength, flexibility, and control to reduce injury risk, especially in ACL tears that are common in female players. And the sociological aspect getting investigated again. The role of peers in injury prevention is significant. If you have a positive peer influence, children are going to be more likely to actively participate in injury prevention consistently versus inconsistently. It keeps an accountability. It's a form of extrinsic motivation that can actually lead to increased intrinsic motivation in this subject. And it just aids everyone along the way having a supportive process like that. And then longitudinal and qualitative studies that occur. We need to track the impact of injury preventions over time, provide insights to long-term effectiveness and strategies. Qualitative, that has been done and focused on more so than longitudinal. So qualitative is delving into the lived experiences and perceptions of the athletes. What needs to be done in the future going forward is combining these studies, the longitudinal aspect with the qualitative, in order to really see how these barriers affect kids and youth participation in sport and injury at a higher level. We need to investigate the social support again. The social support needs to be brought in: coaches, teammates, parents, social support network. All of these need to work together in order to prevent injuries, as we have been preaching this whole entire study. And then psychological interventions to injury. The mental aspect is just as important as the physical aspect. We need to enhance mental resilience. We need mental skills training, mindfulness techniques, physiological support, psychological support. Getting that mentality of playing smart and still playing with heart is going to impact how these athletes go forward in their careers. And to reiterate on some of the findings that we had, enhancing the safety and well-being has to be key going forward. Awareness of warm-up exercises. Many parents, coaches, and players found that only 40% of them really thought that it was very important to have an effective warm-up. Post-discussion, that jumped to 90%. Familiarity with hydration strategies, that went from 45 to 88%. And the importance of physical conditioning went from 55 to 95 after discussion. So again, we just really need these workshops. We need to do more research going forward on how injury prevention aids female athletes and prevents ACL tears, sprains, and the like going forward, with a 3-tiered combined approach from athletes, coaches, and parents. And then here are just some references. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a great day.